cents in my pocket, but right now I got a roof over my head. And since I'm not Dracula, I open up the curtains. My God, I'm not burning or dead. And the light feels so good upon my skin. Maybe I can forgive myself, but I don't know where to begin.
We can kind of control our consciousness, which is a strange phenomenon. And I believe prayer literally is consciousness, how we think. And with Buddhism, the practice is to, for me, this is my experience. I first started when I started praying, meditating, I would get silent. And then it was just thoughts, dude. Thoughts going crazy.
Yes.
And I had this existential crisis of unworthiness. I'm not worthy. After a little bit, you get some rewards. You get some benefits. And then you see this impacting how you treat other people. And that initial stage is like me thinking about me. And clinically, that's depression or anxiety. It's just me thinking about me. And the practice of taking a step back, practicing Buddhism or prayer, something very simple, was kind of, I didn't know that was possible. And that was my anger originally when I found out that prayer is the answer to addiction and it seems so trivial and bypassed by the scientific community that this is actually valuable, that people can actually use this in their everyday life, optimize their health by just taking a few minutes in the morning and getting silent. And you've helped so many people that I've seen through this meditative process that you're able to reach something deeper in people. So how I kind of looked at it is like self can't escape self. That's a classic phrase. So I can go to a million yoga classes. I can keep trying to seek something, but there's a part of enlightenment that's very fascinating to me, that it's the recognition or it's the remembering that you are enlightened.
Yeah, that's an yeah. Well, I love this. I love this conversation. Thank you for having me on. This is cool. But so, yeah. I think so. I think there's kind of a hamster wheel thing that you can get into where it's like, I just gotta, I gotta fix myself. I gotta make myself perfect so that everybody, no one judges me. So I don't have to be anxious about being seen as imperfect or problematic, that I'm seen as perfect and everyone agrees. Like that's an endless, it doesn't go anywhere. You can't ever get there. There will always be people that see you maybe like, oh, so-and-so doesn't like me or whatever. It will always be that. So it's kind of impossible to achieve that. I think there's a real paradox with spiritual stuff, which is like, yeah, on the one hand, it's like you can't do it. Like you can't decide, okay, I'm going to have this revelation of the divine, union that or like, I'm going to have this experiential wisdom that is very profound. I'm going to have it right now. I'm going to sit down, close my eyes, and I'm going to have it. You literally can't. You can try that, but it doesn't, that's not how it works. It's like all you can do is all of the preparatory work of cultivating your attention and like working with your actions, feeling right and aligned in your values, helping people, being of service to others, being part of your community, being helpful to the person you live with, your spouse or whatever, like all of these steps. And then your actual practice of like following your breath or doing your prayer or whatever your practice is. Those are all things that you can do. The small you can do that, the individual self with insecurities and all this stuff, self, self-consciousness, that version of you can do all these things. That version of you cannot experience the divine. Like what you're saying, it's like that version of you, through holding on to that and identifying strictly with that, is the last thing that you have to stop doing. And it's hard, but through not, it's actually kind of, in my experience, it's kind of like a gift. You can't demand a gift. A gift is given. And when the gift is given, you have a new perspective, a deeper perspective. And to me, that's what part of what spirituality is. But it's like, so you have to do everything up to a point, and then you have to just be able to receive a gift. And it's a paradox, because you can't just demand a gift or think, I have nothing I need to do. I don't need to change anything about myself or put in work or time or effort. I'll just decide I'm spiritual. To me, that's not how it works. You do have to do stuff, but it can only take you so far. And at some point it becomes this, like, it's just mysterious. I don't know. It's just, it will unfold.
I agree 100%. The ancient the Jewish mysticism talks about this, and your capacity for light, or your capacity for darkness, is equal to your capacity for light. And in this Jewish mysticism, they don't just stand from the rooftops and say, go get God and be evangelical. They do the opposite. And the idea, God writes straight with crooked lines. So the idea of that, the spirituality is a gift. So I can't just go, there it is, Mike. There you go, dude. Here's God.
Yeah.
You're divine now, dude. It doesn't work like that. However, it comes from within, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It wouldn't be a gift if someone gave it to you. So it has to authentically come from you. And there's a simple playbook, I think, with getting there. I do think that just setting your attention to prayer, setting a practice, there's a magic to it that I do not understand. I don't know why this is not studied infinitesimally more, because it's curing addiction. I've witnessed that with my own eyes. Spiritual guidance, getting people to look way deeper than they ever looked before. There's a recognition where it just, it's like a defense against these psychological pathologies that we're talking about that elicit a self-consciousness, or elicit I'm concerned about myself now. I'm self-conscious. Oh no, dude. Like, there's an existential crisis of unworthiness that comes with these psychological pathologies. Get me, dude. I said what? Oh, that's the existential crisis of unworthiness. And spirituality is an anchor through that. And it's accessible at all times. It's always available. Yeah. And this isn't talked about much. And, people go, you gotta go to therapy, you gotta do X, Y, and Z. And I never found anything there. Like, I really didn't. I don't want to, I know what you do is totally different from therapy. And I want to give you some space to kind of talk about what spiritual guidance, spiritual coaching is, because it's much different than therapy to me.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah. So, I mean, I think, I agree with everything you just said. Like, I think things like prayer and meditation can be, like, incredibly, they can be and are incredibly deep and accessible, in the sense of you can learn about these things, and you can start experimenting and testing them in your life, like today. You don't have to go get a degree or a certification. Like, you can start trying these things. As for how spiritual counseling that I do is different than mental health counseling, is basically, I think we all have psychological needs and problems that we need to address. Maybe I have a need for whatever.
Do you think that?
Any number. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to try to list them, but those are important to address. Like, for example, maybe a diagnosis of a clinical anxiety disorder. Like, that's, if someone comes to me as a spiritual counselor and says, I have clinical anxiety and I'm trying to use spirituality to fix that or address that, I'm going to tell them, okay, like talk to your therapist. Honestly, like that is the realm of mental health counseling, is dealing with thought patterns and these emotional patterns, and trying to use cognitive behavioral therapy or whatever the method is to address those things. If that's a person's really main concern, I would recommend mental health counseling. I think it's, again, it's difficult because then you have to find a good therapist, and maybe that's really hard. I don't know. There's a whole lot. But I would say this, to me, what spiritual counseling requires is a spiritual calling. So if a person says, I am called and drawn to explore spirituality, I don't know what that means exactly, but I know there's something there that I have to explore. I have to look into this. And I have anxiety. Like, then, okay, well, as far as the anxiety piece, I'm not going to say, okay, we can cure that with spirituality. I'm just going to say, maybe you need to also talk to a therapist. I don't know. That's your decision. But the spiritual part, your spiritual calling, what is this deeper calling that you're feeling? How does that show up in your life? What are you drawn to? That's the realm of spiritual counseling. Because let's be realistic, like spirituality is a very big topic, and it's kind of a shit show. Like there's a bazillion spiritual things and spiritual teachers, so called. I don't know. Like there's a lot out there, and it's useful uh, to have a space to reflect on that and try to sort through the next steps. And I differentiate myself and my work from being a spiritual teacher. I'm not teaching the people that I'm working with. I'm not teaching them, this is the spiritual belief that you need to have. These are the spiritual practices you need to do. I'm facilitating a process, admittedly using a Buddhist lens and Buddhist frameworks in a broad sense, to help a person go through, reflect, and sort out what is the next step. Like if they were going to respond in a heartfelt way to their spiritual calling today, what would be the next step for them? What's the next thing? And getting clarity for that is huge, because then people are like, okay, I kind of know what I need to do. And now it's a matter of taking the next step. And then there's another step, and then another, and it evolves. And it's a miracle, and it's also unpredictable, and it's complex, but it's not, let's track your anxiety and resolve your psychological issues through this clinical method. It's, let's explore your spiritual calling and and try to get clarity on your next steps for your spiritual development.
That's very interesting. It's there. Part of me, man, wants to confront the so-called, like, if you're going to get therapy, I don't. For me, my experience personally is therapy never landed. And I'm speaking for the people that are unspoken for, like the complete outcasts of society, degenerates. Like for me, the only thing that ever landed was a spiritual answer.
You
right?
have a spiritual calling. I'm not saying
yes.
That's because okay. You have a spiritual calling.
Yeah, and the only thing, there's two things that I ever worked. It was either I grew out of the question I was asking, like I matured out of it, or I found a spiritual answer. Nothing else worked. And being a scientist, I dismissed meditation. I dismissed prayer before I even went to it. The whole bit is like, when I was 12, I heard a George Carlin bit, and it was so powerful that I instantly became an atheist. I didn't do research. I didn't do anything like that. So spirituality to me, obviously, is an evolution. People are starting wherever they're starting at, and that's okay. And there's a part of spirituality that anchors people through suffering. And I believe that's our story. I believe that has been there since the beginning of time. And with everything going on right now with AI and the psychological pathologies that have taken over the industries, this is my language, Mike. I know, but this is my thing. It's like in the addiction treatment industry, which I have direct experience with, these psychological pathologies took over, and the modality of perception became greed and profit. Because now you have people supporting their families, and it turns into something that it's actually a paradox. They at the very bottom of the hierarchies at a lot of these treatment facilities are people that want to help people. It's therapists that want to help people, man. Unfortunately, what happened was at the very top, it's a business. That's what it is. It's a business. So with spirituality and taking a step out of that, the intention is purely to enlighten, is purely to be a conduit to a spiritual answer that that person may experience on their own, in their own authentic way. And that's truth to me. That is more true than, you know, going to a therapist and thinking I have to improve myself constantly and go to 1,000 yoga classes and then I'll be okay, dude. It's like spirituality can bring someone closer to themselves, if that makes so. Like, you become what you are in a weird sense. Like you become more in line with like your intentions. You take a step back from all the craziness going on in the brain, because the brain can go a million different directions, and then you're worried about, will someone be resentful at me? Is someone's gonna be mad at me? I said that, and that's an existential crisis of unworthiness and shame based. And if that's propagated all the time, then we have to censor ourselves. We have to go, wait, I actually like therapists, and I don't want to step on his toes, like, and the whole idea is like spirituality. You don't have to worry, man. Like there's no worries. Like don't have the anxiety. You can just sit and get quiet at any point in time.
Yeah.
And feel this presence that everything's okay, even though the world could be chaos. It's an anchoring to something bigger than myself.
I would agree with that. Bigger than the small self, bigger than the small s self, you know, it is, I will say this, for you, it sounds like through doing prayer, meditation, the healing experience of those practices sounds pretty available to you in your practice of those things. You know, I think we touched on this earlier, but yeah, for some people, maybe the healing or the relief of, say, something like prayer or mindfulness or any number of other kinds of spiritual practices, the healing experience behind that, or the stabilizing experience of that, or the nervous system calming experience of that, however you want to think about it, maybe that experience is less accessible and it doesn't feel like it's available. And you know, that doesn't mean you have to like therapy. And I guess my gripe with therapy is that it is generally seems to be talked about or perceived as like the answer to all these, pretty much everything. And I guess one of the things that I think and thinking about recently is the same way as a spiritual counselor. It's my responsibility. If someone comes to me and says, I have a mental health disorder and I want to do spirituality to fix that. It's my responsibility, I think, to say, look, if your whole worldview is that you have a mental health disorder and that's your truth, I believe it's my responsibility to say, you should talk to someone who is trained clinically, hopefully very well. There are bad therapists, but hopefully find a very skilled mental health therapist who's trained in addressing your mental health issue on the terms that you're already familiar with and comfortable with, and through the lens you're already using, which is mental health disorder and anxiety and clinical protocols and all that. It's my responsibility to at least say that, like, look, I'm in the spiritual realm, working on the spiritual life and practice. And so look, you know, to solve a psychological problem, go to a psychologist. The same thing though, and this is my kind of thing, is like, I believe there's people And it seems like you're one of them who was told to go to therapy or something, but actually you had a spiritual you had a spiritual thing. You had a spiritual calling. And the therapy is not designed to address that. And I think sometimes, potentially, society doesn't acknowledge that. Like, oh, don't go to therapy if you have a spiritual calling. You need to find something spiritual if you have a spiritual calling. Or like therapists themselves, maybe they're not as aware sometimes of like discerning, oh, this client, yeah, they maybe do have some anxiety, but the way they're talking about it is like talking about God or like the divine or their deepest existential purpose in life. Those are kind of spiritual questions. I'm a therapist. I better send you out to someone who's trained in spiritual counseling or, spiritual practice. I'm not sure that that's happening as much. And I think that's if I had to have a gripe, because I think therapy is great for some people, but I think for people with a spiritual calling, it's probably not enough. It's probably not enough. Yeah. It's probably not quite a right fit, I would say.
I'm going to say my direct experience with working with people that have been told they have this psychological stuff going on, and I've worked with a lot of the worst case scenarios with drug addiction. And the only solution I've found or I've observed directly with my own experience was a spiritual solution. And that Pinball Wizard song I was talking about, such a supple wrist. Now you heard it too much, but so that Pinball Wizard song, dude, it's perfect. Dude. It's the perfect song. It sets the self-deprecation up first, and this deaf, dumb, and blind kid plays a mean pinball, right? That's the story of the song. It's a perfect song. So to leave the self-deprecation and to leave all the noise, I guess, out of what I'm trying to get to is that the spiritual solution, I believe, is available to everyone. And sometimes people get misled down this scientific worldview. And I used to be a material scientist, that this is for the dummies. This is for the people that don't believe in science and, meditation or prayer, which is, by the way, consciousness. It's the most powerful thing on this planet, maybe even the universe. Who knows? I believe that consciousness. So if I believe I have a psychological pathology, I have a psychological pathology. If I believe I'm anxious, then I'm anxious. So there's a part of all of this, and I hate to point towards corruption, but I'm going to do it. It's like, if there's a monetary incentive for people to go to therapy and stuff like that, and I know your viewpoint is like, yeah, like there's a place for all this, and I'm just doing my job as a spiritual advisor, which is to elicit a spiritual growth in a client. And that to me is way more truthful than going to a therapist and gambling all that stuff and putting faith in a therapist, because for my experiences, it made me overthink, right? And for other people that I've worked directly with, it made them overthink. And it seems as if that the therapy and spirituality for me can actually be, they can work together. And I'm not sure why that's not more publicly said, that these modalities can help each other. For me, though, the worst of the worst, the worst case scenario, and there's a lot of people dying out there of fentanyl, and I'm not trying to make this podcast give levity to all of this, but it's like, there's a solution, dude. And it's spirituality. It's finding out that you are what you're seeking, that you actually are supposed to be you. And you're giving way too much thought about other people, way too much. And that's what I experienced. I gave way too much thought to other people, their concerns and their fears. And we touched briefly on this in the beginning. It's like fear can motivate people, but it's also a false evidence appearing real. Did you ever hear that acronym?
No, but I like it.
So false evidence appearing real. It's like fear, man, fear to me is the most intelligent human emotion. So if a bus is coming, fear will make me jump, dude.
Yeah.
But what people conflate this as in the West, I feel, is that there's a mental anxiety that they conflate with fear. So if a bus is coming, I'm not going to go, is this bus going to hit me, dude? I'm going to check my pulse real quick. Am I alive? Like, That's the mental anxiety. But fear actually, it makes me jump out of the way. People conflate that with this mental anxiety from a lack of a spiritual solution.
Yeah, I think one of the places I come back to again and again is the body. Now, I think to me in my spiritual path, the body is central. It's really central. Not all spiritual traditions or paths emphasize the mind body connection. Some might actually say, you know, the flesh is is the problem, and we're trying to just kind of like almost disembody our mind from our flesh, and like that's not the way that I've approached it at all. To me, the body's huge, and the first level is like the nervous system, you know. And I think with fear, um, it's if a person's nervous system literally is like stuck in this fight or flight or freeze response, it's very difficult to release the fear. It's very difficult to release the fear. And there's different approaches to how do we begin to unravel that protective mechanism of the nervous system. I mean, there's a lot in there. There's a lot in there, and there's a lot that contributes to that. And so I do think the spiritual approach is a very good one. But it comes with its own challenges, because once you're really on a spiritual path, you'll see. I mean, you know, it's not all just a walk in the park either. It's like there's challenges. You have to continuously be willing to kind of like let go of your accomplishments in a way, or your status, to keep on moving deeper into spirituality. So it has its challenges. I don't think spirituality is this super easy, like, oh, it's easier than therapy. I actually think in a way, and this may be too long a point to make, but I think in a way, really, spirituality is the hardest, most subtle, most challenging path that a person can take. It's there's a lot that there's a lot to it that can go kind of wonky, or you can get off track. You know, it's kind of a shit show. So it has its challenges, but I would say it's, even if you don't have a full like all in, I'm going to be like a full on spiritual practitioner, there are methods from spiritual traditions that could be very useful in terms of, helping to deal with fear. Definitely. 100%.
100%. And, you know, for, you know, someone, a layman, I guess, just getting started with spirituality, yes, there's going to be trials and tribulations.
Yeah.
I feel as if that it all interconnects. So if I get off the path, man, like, that's good. Like, good, man. I get to learn something. I get to be open-minded, and, you know, like, I love when people tell me I'm wrong, because then I get to be open-minded and correct this course, so to speak. So getting off the path even can be turned into a positive later on, when you have the wisdom, when you sit and have a better perspective.
Yeah.
And what I feel, that there's an undertone of American hate in that's going on. That's a lot of resentment. They're quick to judge whatever it is that I may be perceiving that, right? But the idea is like the spiritual approach kind of gets us more relaxed from this quick temperament, this resentful fueled thing, because resentment in a way is also, I'm up here and they're down here. And what you were talking about is this perceived hierarchy, social hierarchy, right? People can get locked into that as their identity, their consciousness itself. Like, I've witnessed that with family members of addicts, right? So the family members, I'm a savior, I'm up here, they're down here, man. And that becomes their identity itself and consciousness. And guess what their consciousness manifests? What they're addicted to. So like, they're addicted to the family member being in crisis, and then they're gonna be there to save. And I told you this is so. That was a main gripe with me, because sometimes it was harder to deal with the parents of young addicts in the early 20s that weren't autonomous, didn't have responsibility, didn't pay for their own bills. they were kind of like given a death sentence in a way, because that consciousness will prevail, because I believe that's the most powerful thing on the planet. So there's an idea that I'm working with. It's like, if we can all interconnect somehow in a place that's spiritually based, I think a lot of the nonsense, the noise, the worry, the fear, some people are, this election caused so much chaos in the States. And you asked me a great question once, Mike. It was, where do you feel faith, or how do you feel faith? And for me, it's like a modality of perception, which is hard to get people on board on initially. That takes time, man. It takes like experience. It takes like being, oh, it's all going to work out. However, to initially start out there, it's not going to happen. So there is an evolution that occurs. Okay, one thing worked out. Okay, I got a job. Okay, I have faith, a little bit more faith than I did before. And then, okay, this practice is actually bringing me inner peace that I never experienced before. And there's an evolution with faith that can probably grow infinitesimally. I don't know. What's your experience with faith?
So I think everything you're saying is highlighting to me this idea, perspective that I have, I guess, is that there's a few, but in what I see is two main categories of kind of spiritual practice. One being devotional. And I think in devotional practice, the quality of faith is really big. It's like developing faith. And certain styles of Buddhism that I've practiced have really emphasized this devotional quality. You might not think of yourself as devotional, but it's like faith is huge. Oftentimes prayer is big. It's like I am praying to God. Like I might know, okay, I'm maybe not separate from God, but there's the way I'm going to practice is this almost devotional, reverent thing towards the divine. And I think that's massively powerful and works. And so then that's one category. Another category is almost more like mechanical. It's like I'm not it's not about the devotion. It's about I guess my own effort. It's like the long, hard slog of a path. And anyways, so that's, I think in my reflection, it's like, I think I started out spiritually drawn to the more mechanical side of like, I'm just going to learn meditation and I'm going to gain skill in the meditation. Like, and then over time, I was drawn to different styles of Buddhism that emphasized devotion more. And I got really into that, like for a long time, for years. And actually in the past 2 years, 3 years, I've really started to move back towards the non-devotional style. So at this point, faith, less important to me. More important to me is developing my skill in certain methods of internal cultivation. So that isn't to say that, so I guess the broad thing I'm saying is for some people, prayer.
Would you have faith in that process? Because why would you do it if you didn't?
Yeah, it's true. You have to have some amount of faith in the process, but it's like what keeps me going isn't so much my faith in the process, it's the results. It's the results that I experience. And, but yes, you do. I mean, you do have to have some kind of faith. Like, I hope this works. I'm going to give this a shot. I have a reasonable amount of faith that this will work. Let me try it out. Through the efforts and the practice, then the results come and it's like, okay, this is working. Good. Keep going. All that's to say, I think for some people, like when they're told, okay, pray, if they have a connection to I'll say the devotional side of spirituality, they'll say, heck yeah, prayer, I'm in, let's do it. Other people, they might have a spiritual inclination, but it's very much more mechanical. And they might say, I don't want to pray. I don't want to pray. And I still think there's ways that different types of people can approach it, is kind of how I see it. What do you think about that?
I think this, man, I think that it doesn't matter if you if you think there's God or not, dude. If you pray, it's going to work.
Uh-huh.
That's my direct experience. That's direct experience from working with others that were so atheist, dude. It's like spiritual kindergarten. Should I pray? It's like, no, this is consciousness. How do you want to think? Do you want to think positive or do you want to think negative? That's very simple to me. That's a very cogent explanation of what prayer could mean to a layman. And then when you get past that, I think that there's a development that's very valuable with seeing a direct correlation to prayer and how my well-being is. Am I going to hold the door open for someone? Am I going to be kind to my spouse? Am I going to be the best son I can be? And for my experience, that doesn't come from me. Like, I am not that, dude. I just want to, like I was talking about corruption. There's a part of me that wants to go full in and just illuminate all the woes and horrors like that guy Luigi Mangione did. But I know that's not me, man. I know that there's a deeper part of this where there's a spiritual solution where I feel interconnected with myself and the world, and there's a harmony and an intellectual capacity to want to give that, man. And I feel like me and you wouldn't be here if we didn't come to some sort of realization that this is bigger than me, and the path that led me here was a spiritual path in some sort. And
yes,
with the audience right now, if there may be people struggling, there may be people suffering, maybe they have a loved one in a treatment center, maybe a loved one's health is not where they believe it's optimal. And for me, there's no other answer but the spiritual side. Like, I wish I could just scientifically have a materialistic worldview and be a robot, but that's it's just not me, man. Like, I believe in the deeper piece of this, and the deeper people get, then they can kind of wake up to the fact that, like, okay, there's a bunch of noise. My brain just does this thing, man. It's called thinking, and it's the sixth sense in Buddhism. And do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really fascinating area. We have these senses. Yeah, we have our sight, smell, touch, taste, feeling, and then the thinking. And like, usually our attention and our awareness is very, very absorbed in our thinking process and our visual process. Those are the two big ones, I think, that most of us go around. Like, we're really paying attention to what we're thinking and what we're seeing in front of us.
And you're not trying to see right now.
Yeah, just happening. I'm not trying to think either. It's just thinking. And if the podcast ends and we go do our sitting or whatever, we'll probably continue to think. But then there's all these other bases of consciousness that are not the thinking consciousness, and they're not the visual consciousness. There's more consciousnesses that a person can learn to tune into and place attention into. And through doing that, new perspectives, new worlds open up, essentially. And this is where mystical traditions lie, I believe, is outside of the conventional thinking process and outside of just the obvious visual process. There's more subtle realms that consciousness can develop into. And
Totally. And so let's just say, like, if someone's suffering from like a traumatic event in their life, there's a subconscious that is not mapped properly, so to speak, at least for me. And my mind will wander. Oh my God, I have this fear now. I have to have my back to the wall in a restaurant because if stuff goes down, man, I gotta be ready. And like, that's a subconscious. If I'm focusing on that, that's going to manifest into something bigger, manifest more fear, anxieties. If I go do you feel as if you agree with that at some level? If I go through a traumatic event and there's a subconscious involved, right? And then I pay attention to that only, it's going to manifest the same thing. The other swing of it is, like, if you can shift your perspective to accept the suffering, to accept whatever happened in the past, you can generate a new path for you forward in a way. And that's cultivated through a lot of these practices, for me, prayer. And sometimes prayer is asking for strength and courage to get through the day. It may start somewhere. But if you master the prayer, so meek as Moses, have you heard that expression?
No, actually.
Okay. So it means like when Moses, when Moses left Egypt, right? It was really hard to govern people. And he wrote the 10 Commandments and, through God and whatever that means to people. And, meek as Moses means the mastery of prayer or mastery of consciousness itself. And I think it's like Fight Club, the 10 Commandments. Like, first rule of Fight Club, you don't talk about Fight Club. The first couple laws, like the thou shalt not have false idols, wasn't particularly. This is through Emmett Fox, and it's like he doesn't believe that was written for everybody. It was just for the people in that period of time leaving Egypt. And the 10 Commandments were written for the most sophisticated occult minds and also the savage dummies like me that need to hear I shouldn't steal, right? So meek as Moses means mastering prayer and consciousness itself. And what is interesting to me is reading like the 6th law of the 10 Commandments. Thou canst kill. That's the correct translation. And then the first law of thermodynamics, which is energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It seems to be simpatico, and these organizations that seem so different, I feel like there's a place where both can come together. And that's why I was talking about therapy and spiritual guidance. It's like there is a place for both, but the point I'm trying to get at is meek as Moses literally means the mastery of consciousness itself. And I think that's a malleable thing. And I don't know how you feel about that. And everyone has a different feeling about consciousness. How do you quantify consciousness? It's impossible. So, and there's no scientific explanation right now, but I believe that there's I'll say magic to it. There is a magic to consciousness, and it can prevent against suffering in the hardest of hard times if you have this spiritual practice and you cultivated it and it works. So that's the evolution.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, I'm thinking of, so I had Lyme disease when I was younger, and it was pretty
Did you have the bullseye?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I had all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was pretty advanced. Like, I was very sick. I ended up in the hospital. I almost died. Like, I was ill in my 20s for like most of my 20s. The first 2/3 of my 20s, I was pretty sick, actually. It's not funny. If you have Lyme disease, it's really not funny. It's tough. And I remember being in a meditation retreat and having a very intense experience of Lyme disease. And I remember sitting there. It was during a long day of meditation, and I felt horrible. I felt this illness in every cell of my body. Like, it was literally dragging me down from the inside of my soul and trying to submerge me in misery. I was just like, whoa, this is bad. This is really bad. And I remember really realizing that my entire training in terms of spiritual practice was coming down to this fork in the road of like, am I going to go down the way of feeling really scared of this and feeling really bad and feeling miserable and feeling like I'm screwed and just super ill? Or am I going to, against all logic and all odds, am I going to go take an attitude of, you know what, this is going to change. It won't be forever. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm gonna face this. I'm gonna keep going. And I chose the second option. And I remember really realizing, like, wow, it's not like the pain went away, but I remember realizing, like, I had to make a decision to not let myself go down a certain road of thinking. And to me personally, that is a big part of what spirituality can offer over time is a way to keep on directing ourselves in the way that our spirit, in the way that our soul is wanting us to go. Not so much in the way that our conscious thinking is always taking us, but in the way a deeper part of us wants us to be well. And so we have to listen to that part and continue to choose, even if it's painful, very painful at times. We have to keep choosing to follow that. And it's a mess. And it's not a straight line, like you pointed out very well. It's not like, okay, if you're on the right path, you're on the right path and you don't veer and everything's great. No, it's a zigzag. And there's a lot of humility along the way, as we all know. It's like there's a lot of lessons and a lot of times when you realize, oh my God, I'm still a piece of shit, but here we go. I'm going to keep trying and not take that in as an identity of, oh, I'm a bad person, but take it in as like, okay, there's something I need to change here. And I need to maybe apologize. I need to maybe own up to some mistakes and redirect and move forward in the way that my deeper calling is guiding me to. And I think spiritual practice can help us stay closer to what is our deeper calling asking of us? What is our deeper inner compass? Where's it pointing us? And where do we need to be going? Because without the spiritual practice, whether it's prayer or meditation, it's easy to get stuck just in our thinking that we're getting fed from social media and from any other, billions of things, rather than listening within, listening to ourself in a deeper sense, ourself, not just our small self, but potentially our deeper self. So yeah, that's totally. I think there's a lot there.
Dude, there's so much there. And the self itself is a concept. For someone listening to this for the first time, maybe they haven't heard much about this, but the deepest self is still a mystery to me, because we know what we don't want to do. Like you were pointing out, like we don't want to be an asshole. We want to apologize, actually. We want to be honest with who I am. And maybe I want to treat this person better. Do I owe an apology to this person? And if you contemplate that and meditate on it, the answer will come. It's almost like magic. But the innermost part of us, it's almost like we know we're not, but we'll never know truly what this thing is, what the soul is. But we can say what it's not. And I've had a hard time personally trying to get to the place of truly who I am, like as a being, past the physical sensations, past the visual, hearing, thinking, like, what is this thing, dude? And I don't think I'll ever be able to get there, but maybe that's a limit I'm putting on myself. Have you ever gotten to the place where you're like, okay, this is it, dude. This is actually who I am? Or do you have the more an experience like mine where you go, this is not me, this is not me, this is not me. I don't like being an asshole. I don't like resentment. I don't like feeling suffering. I don't like self-pity and doubt and all this weird stuff that gets in the way from blocking actually what I am. Because I know I'm not a resentment. I know I'm not self-pity. That's logically true. But the deeper spiritual practices brings us awareness to like, okay, I know what I'm not.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think from my understanding of spirituality, which is very informed by Eastern cultivation, Eastern consciousness and physical and energetic cultivation practices, from my understanding, it's like to have that awareness or awakening to the core of your being, like true spirit, that true deepest spiritual, consciousness within yourself. That is very rare, the full thing. And then rarer still is to be able to maintain that throughout all of your existence. Every situation you encounter, you're not separated from that recognition, that awareness, that profound awakening. So this is like, to me, this is like what Buddha is, or the great sages of various different traditions. Like they have, I believe, you don't have to believe this, I just do believe it for some reason. They have attained that. They're not normal people who have doubts. They're like, well, I'm kind of not sure. they've transcended into like this very, very remarkable spiritual attainment. That's not very common. I don't believe. There's a lot of people going around saying, "Oh, I have this awakening and I'm completely enlightened," and I don't believe them. Like, I don't think so. I think it's very rare. Um, that's my view. I will say that I think what happens is as people practice, depending on a lot of factors, the glimpses become more frequent. And maybe it's not a glimpse into the full, final, like deepest possible reality, but it's like, whoa, a glimpse beyond the into a realm beyond this normal thing that I'm identifying with. It's like an experience that deepens, and it's like glimpses. And to me, that's what is more common from what I've talked to people and potentially my own life experiences, is that, you know, certainly I have not like, you know, I'm not like an enlightened being. That is not the case. I would say spiritual practice is leading me towards having more experiences, I guess, of deeper levels of my being. I think that's the best thing I could say about that.
Through Buddhist suffering, or Jesus suffered through this suffering. It seems there's a commonality though between a spiritual experience. I feel like that's the common denominator between all these people that claim they're enlightened, so to speak. So I think that's possible for people to get to a place where they are enlightened. And I also agree at the same time that it's a fleeting. So just because a spiritual experience has gone doesn't mean it's still not there. So we just constantly forget as humans, and we have this thinking that goes on, and our experience, we might have a divine experience after Lyme's disease, right? And then 10 days later, we'll kind of forget. It doesn't mean that the experience went away. It just means that our present moment shifted, and it's always available though. That's what I feel is truth. Like, it is still available, even though it kind of fleeted away.
I agree. No, I mean, it's difficult to talk. These things are difficult to talk about. I think, I tend to agree with you. I think somebody who for truly experiences that the deepest spiritual truth is literally always available to them, even in the worst situation. It's rare to have that.
Exactly. Did you lose my video?
I lost your signal. Yes.
Okay. We're still on the air.
We're going late, huh?
I know. So apologize for the beginning. So Michael, I just want to say again, I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about spirituality. What I've witnessed, first direct experience, is that people who worked with you at my sober living had a direct experience with deepening their understanding of who they were, and it benefited them. So I want to just highlight the fact that spiritual coaching, going into the spiritual world, I guess, with you, I saw direct benefits, and prior to that, I've seen miracles happen. In many cases, the worst of the worst cases, spirituality was the only thing that landed. So I just want to highlight that. I know we zigzagged all over just like life did. That's life.
Yeah,
right?
No, it's been a great conversation. I really appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate you saying that. And yeah, absolutely. Like, it's an honor for me to work with people who are drawn to exploring their inner world in the context of spiritual practice. And yeah, if anyone listening is interested in like a free, call with me, I do 30-minute calls to kind of just basically go over your spiritual calling. What practices are you drawn to, and what would be the next step for you in terms of, taking the next step to answer the spiritual calling in your life. There's 30 minutes. They're totally free, and there's no pressure to work with me. But then if through that conversation, if we feel that there's something valuable, we can talk about working together. So that's on my website if anyone's interested.
Beautiful. That link will be in the description below, and that's a perfect place to end, man. You said that so beautifully. So thank you so much for jumping on.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
I don't got your 2 cents in my pocket, but right now I got a roof over my head. And since I'm not Dracula, I open up the curtains. My God, I'm not